I remember standing in my kitchen holding that invitation and thinking something didn't feel right, because when your own granddaughter turns 7 years old, you shouldn't feel like you're being invited to something you might not actually be welcome at. The envelope had arrived only 3 days before the party, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a water bill, and for a moment I honestly thought it had been sent by mistake. My granddaughter Lily had birthdays every year like any other child, but for the past few years I had always been the one helping plan them. I was the one who baked the cake, the one who tied the balloons to the fence in the backyard, the one who made sure every child left with a small gift bag and a smile. This time, though, the card felt different in my hands. It was printed, not handwritten, and it simply said that Lily's birthday party would be held on Saturday afternoon at my son Daniel's house. No note from Daniel. No cheerful message from Lily. And most noticeably, nothing from my daughter-in-law Ashley. I set the card down on the counter and stared at it longer than I cared to admit. At 68 years old, you learn to recognize certain feelings before you even understand them. A quiet hesitation. A small knot in your chest that tells you something isn't quite the way it used to be. Still, Lily was my granddaughter, and no strange feeling in the world was going to keep me from celebrating her birthday. I decided right then that I would go, and I would bring her something special. The next morning I drove about 12 miles to a small toy store on the other side of town. The kind of place with wooden shelves and bright windows filled with puzzles, dolls, and little science kits that made children curious about the world. Lily had always loved building things with her hands, so I chose a colorful craft set that let her paint and decorate her own birdhouse. I could already imagine her sitting on the back steps with a little brush in her hand, concentrating the way she always did, her tongue pressed slightly against her cheek while she worked. That image alone made me smile all the way home. On the morning of the party, I woke up early the way I always do. Old habits stay with you when you've spent decades raising a family. I brewed my coffee, watched the sun climb slowly over the rooftops across the street, and wrapped Lily's gift in bright pink paper with silver stars. I even tied a ribbon around the box, the same way I used to do when Daniel was a little boy. By the time I finished getting ready, it was a little after 1 in the afternoon, and the party was scheduled to start at 2. Daniel's house was only about a 20-minute drive from mine, a quiet suburban neighborhood with tidy lawns and maple trees that lined the sidewalks. As I pulled into the street, I could already see colorful balloons tied to the mailbox and a banner stretched across the garage that said "Happy Birthday, Lily." There were at least 6 cars parked along the curb, and I could hear the faint sound of children laughing somewhere in the backyard. For a moment, the uneasy feeling I'd had earlier faded away. It looked like a perfectly normal birthday party. I picked up the wrapped gift from the passenger seat, stepped out of my car, and walked toward the house I had visited hundreds of times before. But as I reached the front walkway, I noticed something strange. The front door was closed, which was unusual during parties like this. Normally it would be wide open with people coming and going. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the window beside the door I could see decorations hanging in the hallway, and a few coats draped over the banister. I rang the bell again, thinking maybe the music in the backyard was too loud for anyone to hear. After a few seconds the door finally opened, and standing there looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read was Ashley. For a moment neither of us spoke. Ashley stood in the doorway holding the edge of the door, as if she had only opened it halfway on purpose. Behind her I could hear children laughing somewhere in the backyard, and the faint sound of music playing through outdoor speakers. The house smelled like vanilla frosting and barbecue sauce, the familiar scent of a birthday party in full swing. I smiled the way any grandmother would when she arrives to celebrate her granddaughter. I lifted the wrapped box slightly so she could see it and said hello in the calmest voice I could manage. Ashley looked at the gift for a second and then back at me, and her expression did not change. It was not anger exactly, and it was not surprise either. It was something colder than that, something carefully controlled. She stepped slightly into the doorway but did not move aside to let me in. I glanced past her shoulder, half expecting Lily to run down the hallway the way she always did when I visited. Normally she would hear my voice and shout my name before throwing her arms around my waist. But the hallway was empty. The decorations were bright and cheerful, streamers taped along the walls and a banner that said "Happy Birthday Lily" hanging above the staircase. Yet somehow the house felt strangely quiet in that moment between Ashley and me. I asked where Lily was and Ashley answered that everyone was in the backyard. Her tone was flat, almost rehearsed. I nodded and said that I would go say hello to her before the cake was cut. I took a small step forward, expecting Ashley to move aside. Instead, she remained exactly where she was. That was when the uncomfortable feeling I had earlier that morning returned, heavier now, settling somewhere deep in my chest. Ashley folded her arms slowly and leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, as if she had no intention of letting the conversation end quickly. I asked if everything was all right. She said yes, everything was perfectly fine, but the way she said it made the words sound like they meant the opposite. For a second I wondered if Daniel and Ashley had argued earlier, or if something stressful had happened during the party preparations. Large gatherings can make anyone tense. I tried to keep my voice gentle and told her the decorations looked beautiful. I said Lily must be having a wonderful day. Ashley glanced over her shoulder toward the backyard where the laughter continued. Then she looked back at me again. There was a pause long enough that I could hear the wind moving through the maple tree beside the porch. I noticed 2 pairs of children's shoes sitting near the wall inside the doorway, and a stack of brightly colored gift bags on a table in the hall. Everything about the scene said that a happy celebration was happening just a few steps away. Everything except the way Ashley stood between me and the rest of the house. I tightened my grip slightly around the ribbon on Lily's present, and reminded myself that sometimes misunderstandings happen in families. Maybe Ashley was simply overwhelmed hosting so many guests. I smiled again and said that I would not stay too long, that I just wanted to hug my granddaughter and give her the little gift I had brought. Ashley looked at the box once more and then slowly shook her head. The motion was small but unmistakable. My smile faded before I could stop it. I felt the quiet shift in the air between us, the same way you feel a storm arriving before the clouds even appear. And in that moment, standing on my own son's front porch with my granddaughter's birthday present in my hands, I realized Ashley was not blocking the doorway by accident. The small shake of Ashley's head lingered in the air between us like a door quietly closing, and for a second I wondered if I had misunderstood what she meant. I stood there on the porch holding Lily's gift while the sound of children laughing drifted from the backyard, bright and carefree, completely unaware of the strange moment unfolding at the front of the house. I cleared my throat gently and tried to keep my tone warm. I told Ashley that I only wanted to step inside for a minute to see Lily before the cake. She did not move. Instead, she let out a slow breath and adjusted the sleeve of her sweater, as if preparing herself for a conversation she had already decided how it would end. She said my name in a calm voice that sounded polite on the surface but carried a firmness underneath it. "Margaret," she said, "I think it would be better if you did not come in." At first I simply blinked at her because the sentence did not make sense. Not come in. The words echoed in my mind while I tried to process them. This was my son's home, the place where I had helped assemble furniture when they first moved in, the kitchen where I had stood countless times washing dishes after family dinners. I asked her quietly what she meant. Ashley shifted her weight slightly and looked past me toward the street as if checking whether anyone else might be walking up the driveway. When her eyes returned to mine, the softness that sometimes appeared when she spoke to neighbors or friends was completely gone. She told me that the party was already full, and that it would probably be better if I went home. The sentence was delivered so evenly that for a moment it sounded like she was discussing something as ordinary as the weather. Behind her, the sound of a child shouting Lily's name carried through the house, followed by the burst of laughter that always happens when a group of children are playing together. I felt a strange pressure building behind my ribs, not anger exactly, but the heavy confusion of someone being told something that simply does not belong in the situation they are standing in. I asked where Daniel was. Ashley said he was outside with the guests. Her answer came quickly, almost too quickly. I glanced again past her shoulder toward the hallway, half expecting my son to appear and clear up whatever misunderstanding had taken place. Instead, the hallway remained empty, bright streamers swaying slightly in the air from the ceiling vent. I told Ashley that I had brought Lily a present, and that I had driven 20 minutes to celebrate her birthday. I said I would only stay a short while. Ashley listened without interrupting, her arms now folded loosely across her chest. When I finished speaking, she tilted her head just slightly, the way someone does when they believe they have already explained something clearly enough. She said again that it would be better if I left. The words were almost identical to the first time she said them, only this time there was less patience in her voice. I could feel the porch boards beneath my shoes and the warm afternoon sun on the back of my neck. Yet the moment felt oddly cold. For a second neither of us moved. The music in the backyard switched to a different song, and I heard what sounded like Daniel's voice laughing somewhere beyond the fence. That was when the realization finally settled in my mind. Ashley was not delaying me because the party was crowded. She was not overwhelmed or distracted. She had opened that door knowing exactly what she intended to say. And she was standing there making it clear that in her eyes, I did not belong inside that house today. For several seconds I simply stood there holding the present while Ashley watched me as if she expected me to turn around immediately and walk back to my car. The music from the backyard drifted through the open windows, cheerful and bright, and every few moments I could hear children shouting Lily's name as they ran around playing games. It felt strange knowing that my granddaughter's birthday party was happening only a few steps away, while I was being told to leave from the front porch like a stranger who had arrived at the wrong house. I took a slow breath and reminded myself to stay calm. I had lived long enough to understand that reacting with anger rarely solves anything, especially when family is involved. I asked Ashley quietly if Daniel knew she was asking me to leave. The question seemed to irritate her slightly because her eyebrows tightened for just a moment before her face returned to that controlled expression she had been wearing since opening the door. She told me that Daniel was busy hosting the guests, and that there was no need to bother him about this. The way she said the word "this" made it sound as if my presence was some small inconvenience that needed to be handled quickly before the party continued. I glanced again into the hallway behind her, and noticed the table covered with brightly colored gift bags. I could also see a stack of wrapped presents that had already been opened, their paper folded neatly beside them. It meant the party had been going on for a while already. I wondered how long Lily had been asking where her grandmother was. I wondered whether anyone had even mentioned that I had arrived. I held the present a little closer to my chest and told Ashley that I had not come to cause trouble. I only wanted to give Lily her birthday gift and wish her a happy birthday in person. I said I would stay for 10 minutes at most and then quietly head home so the celebration could continue. Ashley shook her head again, more firmly this time. She stepped slightly farther into the doorway so that there was no longer even a narrow space beside her. Her voice remained steady but it carried a sharper edge now. She said, "Margaret, you really should go. The party is for family and we already have everything handled today." Hearing those words made something inside me grow very still. The party is for family. I repeated the sentence silently in my mind because it sounded so strange coming from someone who had married into the same family I had built over decades. I looked at her carefully, trying to understand whether this was a misunderstanding or something much more deliberate. I asked her directly if she was telling me that I was not welcome at my own granddaughter's birthday. Ashley did not answer right away. Instead, she folded her arms again and glanced briefly toward the driveway as another car passed slowly down the street. Then she looked back at me and gave a small shrug that felt colder than any argument could have been. She said that sometimes it is better for everyone when certain people do not attend every gathering. The sentence was delivered so casually that for a moment I almost thought I had imagined it. Behind her, the laughter in the backyard grew louder as someone turned the music up. I could even hear Daniel's voice again somewhere outside, greeting what sounded like another guest arriving through the side gate. And standing there on that porch, listening to my son welcome people into a party that I was being asked to leave, I finally understood that Ashley was not simply having a stressful afternoon. She had decided long before I rang that doorbell that I would not be part of this celebration. I felt the weight of Ashley's words settle heavily in the quiet space between us, and for a moment I simply looked at her, searching her face for even the smallest hint that she might soften or take back what she had just said. Instead, she remained exactly where she was, one shoulder against the doorframe, arms folded as though she had already decided the conversation was over. The music in the backyard continued playing and I could hear children laughing as if nothing unusual was happening just 20 feet away. I thought about Lily running around with her friends, probably wearing the sparkly pink dress she loved so much, and the idea that she might look around later and wonder why her grandmother had not come made my chest tighten. I cleared my throat gently and told Ashley that I understood hosting a party could be stressful. I said perhaps we had simply gotten off on the wrong foot today. I reminded her that I had driven across town because Lily means the world to me, and that I would never miss her birthday, unless there was absolutely no other choice. Ashley listened without interrupting, But her expression did not change. When I finished speaking, she let out a slow breath and shook her head once more, this time with a kind of tired impatience. She said, "Margaret, this is not about stress. I am asking you politely to leave because today is not the right day for you to be here." Hearing her say that made the moment feel even more unreal. I asked quietly what she meant by not the right day. For several seconds she did not answer. Then she glanced back toward the backyard again, almost as if checking whether anyone might come inside and overhear us. When she turned back to me, her voice was lower than before but much firmer. She said that sometimes family events go more smoothly when there are fewer complications, and that she had worked very hard to make Lily's party perfect. I asked her what complication she believed I was causing by simply showing up to celebrate my granddaughter's birthday. Ashley pressed her lips together for a second before responding. When she finally spoke, the words came out with a sharpness she had been holding back until that moment. She said that Lily already had plenty of people around her today, and that there was no need to add any awkwardness by bringing up old family tensions. The sentence hung in the air, and for the first time I realized Ashley was not talking about the party itself. She was talking about something she believed had been building for a long time. I told her calmly that if there were tensions, then they should be discussed like adults rather than used as a reason to keep a grandmother away from a child's birthday. Ashley let out a small laugh that did not sound friendly at all. She said, "Margaret, please do not pretend you do not understand. You know exactly what I am talking about." I stood there for a moment trying to piece together what she meant, but nothing in my mind explained why I was being turned away from the front door of my own son's house. The afternoon sun had shifted slightly, and I noticed the shadow of the porch railing stretching across the driveway where my car was parked. A warm breeze carried the smell of grilled hamburgers from the backyard, and somewhere inside the house a timer beeped briefly before someone turned it off. Everything around us continued as if the day was perfectly normal. Yet Ashley remained standing in the doorway, blocking the entrance with quiet determination. She looked at the present still in my hands and then back at my face. Her voice softened just slightly, but the meaning of her words did not change. She said that the kindest thing I could do for everyone today would be to leave before the guests started asking questions. And standing there on that porch, listening to my daughter-in-law calmly suggest that my presence was something that needed to be hidden, I realized that whatever line had been crossed in Ashley's mind, she believed it justified shutting the door on me during my granddaughter's birthday. For a long moment neither of us spoke. I stood on the porch holding Lily's present while Ashley's words settled into the quiet space between us, and I realized that if I reacted the way she probably expected, by raising my voice or demanding to see my son, the situation would only turn into the kind of scene she could later describe however she wanted. At my age you learn that sometimes silence is stronger than argument. I took a slow breath and looked past Ashley into the house one more time. The hallway decorations moved gently from the air conditioning vent, and I could hear the faint sound of children's footsteps running across the backyard deck. Someone outside called Lily's name again and a group of kids burst into laughter. It sounded like the kind of birthday party every child deserves, full of noise and excitement and simple happiness. I realized that if I forced my way into the celebration now, Lily might remember the tension more than the fun, and that was the last thing I wanted for her. So instead of arguing, I simply nodded once. Ashley seemed slightly surprised by that reaction, as if she had prepared herself for a disagreement that never came. I told her in a calm voice that I understood she wanted the day to go smoothly, and that I had no intention of creating a scene at a child's birthday party. Her shoulders relaxed a fraction, but she still did not step away from the doorway. I glanced down at the present in my hands, the bright pink wrapping paper with the silver stars catching the sunlight. For a second I imagined Lily opening it later, carefully painting the little wooden birdhouse the way she loved to paint anything that required patience and creativity. I thought about the many afternoons we had spent together doing crafts at my kitchen table, the smell of paint and glue filling the room while she talked about school and her friends. The idea that she might not even know I had come today felt heavier than anything Ashley had said. I lifted the gift slightly and told Ashley that I had brought something for Lily. I asked if she would at least give it to her later and tell her that her grandmother hoped she had the happiest birthday. Ashley hesitated for a moment before taking the box from my hands. She looked down at the wrapping paper as if examining it, then nodded briefly. I thanked her quietly. For a few seconds neither of us moved. Then I said something else that I had not originally planned to say, but that felt important in that moment. I told Ashley that families can disagree about many things, but children should never be placed in the middle of those disagreements. I said Lily deserves to grow up surrounded by people who care about her, and that I will always be one of those people whether I am standing inside the house or outside on the porch. Ashley did not respond to that. She simply held the present against her arm and looked past me toward the street again. I turned slowly and walked down the steps of the porch, feeling the warm afternoon air on my face as I reached the driveway. The sound of the party continued behind me, laughter and music blending together in a way that almost made the situation feel unreal. I opened the car door but paused before getting inside. Something about the way Ashley had spoken earlier kept echoing in my mind, especially her comment about avoiding questions from the guests. That was when a quiet thought occurred to me. If she was so concerned about people asking questions, then perhaps there was more about this situation that had not yet been said. And as I sat behind the steering wheel looking back once at the decorated house where my granddaughter's birthday party continued without me, I began to realize that leaving quietly might not be the end of this story after all. I sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the distant sounds of the party continuing behind the house. Children were laughing, music was playing, and every now and then I could hear the scrape of chairs or the faint murmur of adults talking. From the outside it sounded like a perfectly ordinary birthday celebration, the kind that families remember fondly years later. Yet I was sitting alone in my car in the driveway, something I had never imagined would happen on my granddaughter's birthday. I started the engine but did not immediately put the car in reverse. Instead I found myself looking again at the front of the house, at the colorful banner hanging above the garage and the balloons tied to the mailbox swaying gently in the breeze. For a moment I thought about simply driving home, and pretending the afternoon had never happened. At my age it is easy to convince yourself that avoiding conflict is the most peaceful option. But the more I sat there, the more Ashley's earlier words replayed in my mind. She had not just asked me to leave quietly. She had said it would be better if I left before the guests started asking questions. That sentence stayed with me because it suggested something very specific. It suggested that someone inside that backyard might notice my absence and wonder why Lily's grandmother was not there. And if people started asking questions, Ashley would need an answer. I looked down at my empty hands where Lily's present had been only a few minutes earlier. Ashley had taken the gift, but something about the way she hesitated before accepting it made me realize she might not actually want Lily to know I had been there at all. That thought settled heavily in my chest. I imagined Lily opening her presents later, surrounded by her friends and never realizing that her grandmother had driven across town just to wish her a happy birthday. I pictured Ashley quietly setting the birdhouse kit aside, perhaps planning to give it to Lily another day without ever mentioning where it came from. The idea that the truth of this afternoon could simply disappear that easily did not sit right with me. I turned off the engine again and leaned back slightly in the seat, thinking carefully about what to do next. I had no desire to walk back to the door and argue with Ashley. That would only create the exact scene she seemed so eager to avoid. But there was another possibility. If the concern truly was that guests might ask questions, then perhaps the guests themselves deserved to hear a simple and honest answer. I stepped out of the car and stood quietly beside it for a moment, listening again to the sounds drifting from the backyard. The side gate that led to the yard was only about 30 feet down the driveway. From where I stood I could see the top of a colorful party tent, and the edge of the wooden fence decorated with streamers. I began walking slowly toward the gate, not with anger or determination but with a calm sense that something needed to be handled openly rather than hidden. As I approached, I could hear Daniel's voice more clearly now along with the chatter of several adults talking near what sounded like a grill. Someone laughed loudly at a joke, and another person mentioned how wonderful the decorations looked. None of them knew what had just happened at the front door. I reached the gate and paused with my hand resting lightly on the latch. For a moment I simply stood there listening to the celebration happening on the other side of the fence, knowing that within a few seconds I would either walk away quietly or step forward, and allow the truth of the situation to be seen by everyone at the party. And as the laughter from the backyard continued, I realized that Ashley might have hoped no one would ever ask where I was. But sometimes the most unexpected moments are the ones that make an entire room suddenly fall silent. I rested my hand on the latch for a moment longer, listening to the laughter on the other side of the gate, and I realized something simple but important. I had not come here to argue with anyone. I had come to wish my granddaughter a happy birthday. That was all. With that thought in mind, I lifted the latch and gently pushed the gate open. The backyard was filled with the warm noise of a family gathering on a sunny afternoon. Colorful balloons were tied to the corners of a large party tent. A long folding table was covered with bright paper plates and bowls of snacks, and a small group of children were running in circles near a bounce house that had been set up near the fence. Lily stood near the center of the yard wearing a pink dress with glittering shoes, laughing as two of her friends tried to balance balloons on their heads. The moment I stepped through the gate, one of the adults nearest the grill turned and noticed me. It was Daniel. My son paused mid-sentence while speaking to another guest, and for a second he simply stared at me as if he was trying to understand why I had appeared from the side of the house instead of coming through the front door. A few other people nearby noticed the same thing and began glancing in my direction. I walked forward slowly, keeping my posture calm and my expression gentle. Lily had not seen me yet because she was still focused on the game she was playing with her friends. Daniel set down the pair of tongs he had been holding and walked toward me, confusion written across his face. He asked when I had arrived. His voice carried just enough that several guests nearby turned their attention toward us. I told him quietly that I had arrived a little while ago and had stopped by the front door first. Daniel frowned slightly as if trying to piece together what that meant. Before he could ask another question, Lily turned around after hearing my voice and her face lit up the way it always did when she saw me. She ran across the grass and wrapped her arms around my waist in a tight hug. I bent down and hugged her back, breathing in the familiar scent of birthday cake and strawberry shampoo. She asked why I had not come sooner because everyone else had been there for a long time. I smiled gently and told her that sometimes grown-ups get a little delayed. Several guests were now watching the exchange with mild curiosity, including a neighbor who had known our family for years and a couple of Daniel's co-workers standing near the table. Lily looked up at me and asked where her present was because she had not seen it with the other gifts. For a moment the yard grew noticeably quieter, not silent yet, but quieter in the way conversations pause when people sense that something unusual might be happening. Daniel glanced toward the house, his expression tightening slightly. I kept my voice calm and warm as I answered Lily's question. I told her that I had brought her a present earlier, and had given it to her mother at the front door so she could add it to the others. Lily's eyes brightened and she said she wanted to see it right away. At that exact moment Ashley stepped out onto the back patio holding the wrapped box against her side. She stopped when she saw the group gathered near me and Daniel, and for a brief second her expression froze as if she had not expected this scene at all. Several guests turned toward her at the same time. Daniel looked from me to Ashley with a puzzled expression, and asked her quietly why she had not mentioned that I had arrived earlier. The laughter and music that had filled the yard only moments before faded into a strange stillness. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the children seemed to slow down their games as the attention of nearly everyone at the party shifted toward the small space between Daniel, Ashley, and me. And in that moment, exactly the kind Ashley had hoped to avoid, the entire backyard seemed to fall into a silence that made every word spoken next impossible to ignore. For a few seconds no one spoke. The soft music playing through the backyard speakers continued, but the cheerful energy that had filled the party only moments earlier seemed to drain away as people looked between Daniel, Ashley, and me. Lily was still holding my hand, her small fingers wrapped around mine while she looked up at her parents with innocent curiosity. Daniel took a step closer to Ashley, his voice low but clear enough that the nearest guests could hear him. He asked again why she had not mentioned that I had arrived earlier. Ashley shifted the wrapped present in her arms and glanced around the yard, suddenly aware that several neighbors and friends were watching the exchange with quiet interest. For a moment it looked as if she was searching for a simple explanation that would smooth everything over. But before she could say anything, Lily tugged gently on my hand and asked if she could open the present now. Her voice was bright and hopeful, completely unaware of the tension surrounding the adults. Daniel looked down at his daughter and forced a small smile. He said of course she could open it. Ashley hesitated only a second before stepping forward and handing the gift to Lily. The pink paper with silver stars caught the sunlight as Lily carried the box to the nearby table where several other presents were stacked. A few of the children gathered around her immediately, excited to see what was inside. Daniel remained standing beside me, his expression thoughtful now rather than confused. He asked quietly what had happened at the front door. I did not raise my voice or accuse anyone. I simply told him the truth in the same calm tone I had used all afternoon. I said that when I arrived earlier I had knocked on the door and spoken with Ashley, and she had suggested it would be better if I went home before the guests began asking questions. The words were simple, but in the stillness of the backyard they carried farther than I expected. I noticed two neighbors glance at one another with surprised expressions, and Daniel's shoulders stiffened slightly as he processed what I had said. Ashley opened her mouth as if to respond, but Daniel held up his hand gently, signaling that he wanted a moment to think. Meanwhile, Lily had finished tearing open the wrapping paper. The colorful birdhouse kit slid out of the box and she gasped with delight. She lifted the wooden pieces in the air, and announced to everyone nearby that she was going to paint it bright purple, and hang it in the big tree by the fence. The children around her cheered, instantly returning to their excitement. Watching her smile made something inside me feel lighter again. Daniel looked from Lily back to me, then over to Ashley. The quiet in the yard had not completely disappeared, but the sharp tension from earlier had softened into something more reflective. After a long moment, Daniel spoke again, this time addressing everyone nearby with a calm voice. He said that sometimes families misunderstand each other, and that the important thing today was celebrating Lily's birthday together. Several guests nodded politely, clearly relieved that the moment was not turning into an argument. Ashley stood near the patio holding her hands together, her expression no longer confident but uncertain. I did not say anything more because there was nothing left to prove. The truth had already been spoken out loud in front of everyone. Lily ran back toward me a minute later, holding the birdhouse pieces proudly and asking if I would help her paint them another day. I smiled and told her I would be happy to. As the music slowly grew louder again and conversations resumed across the backyard, I realized that the silence Ashley had feared had already happened, and sometimes that silence says more than any argument ever could.